Thanks, Martin. Well, one of the oldest cars here on display is this V8 Ford Galaxie behind me, and it's certainly one of the biggest cars that we've seen. It pretty much dwarfed the European opposition back in the 60s, including the Lotus Cortina of Jim Clark. And by contrast to the small car like the Mini, well, that one is huge. And just look at the difference in size. This is the good old Mini, the first entered the championship back in the 60s, but there is certainly no slouch out there on the track. This GT model won the championship in 78 and 79 with Richard Longman at the wheel.
Well, of course, Vauxhall, the reigning British touring car champions, haven't just been involved in the series through the 80s and 90s. They were involved a long way back. Back in the 70s, three names were synonymous with Vauxhall's success. Jerry Marshall, dealer team Vauxhall, the team that was set up and funded by the manufacturer's own dealers, and of course Bill Blydenstein. Now sadly we lost Jerry Marshall and Bill Blydenstein in the last couple of years, but the sort of memory of Jerry's sideways tail-out motoring style is never going to be forgotten. And it's performances like his second overall in the Spa 24 Hours back in 1977 with Aussie touring car great Peter Brock that really helped put Vauxhall and dealer team Vauxhall on the map.
Back in the mid-70s, the Triumph Dolomite was the car to be affectionately known as the Dolly. This went on to be one of the most iconic cars in the British Touring Car Championship. Ralph Brooke designed the car back in 1973, and 2 years later, British touring car legend Andy Rouse went on to claim his first title. Now this is another classic in the touring car era, the Ford Cortina, or should I say the Lotus Cortina. Now, this car was a project between the two companies to make Ford's saloon car into a very sexy racing car. Jim Clark raced one of these to great success against a very varied opposition. Here's Martin with another Ford.
So if I said to you, splash it all over, you'd know immediately what era we're in. And you only have to take one quick look at this 1977 3-litre Capri S to just think immediately sideburns, flares, and classic tail-out front-engine rear-wheel drive motoring. Of course, through the 70s, the Capri was a huge touring car hit for Ford on the continent, winning the European Touring Car Championship and in the British Series. And its success continued into the 80s as well, even as the front-wheel drive cars and 2-litre era was arriving, the Capri was still an outright front runner. And now this car, still in period livery, is racing in historic touring car action. So 50 years after the start of the British Touring Car Championship, some of its big stars are still out there wowing the crowds. And when you get a Capri on full noise and opposite lock, there are a few more evocative sights of the 70s that don't actually involve members of the cast of the Sweeney.
The 80s saw this big brute, the Rover Sdi, with its 3.5-litre V8 engine tearing up the tracks around the country. And behind the wheel, well, a host of well-known drivers. Steve Soper, Andy Rouse and Tim Harvey behind the wheel. But this car always remained a firm favourite with the fans.